I'm Emma, and I have a deep appreciation for science. While I'm not religious, I acknowledge that there are certain phenomena that science can't fully explain. My story begins when I was just a 3-year-old toddler. My cousin and I were exceptionally close. Our aunt or grandmother used to take care of us when my mom was at work, and the small age gap between us made us inseparable. Our bond was unbreakable, and some of my earliest memories revolve around our adventures. For simplicity, I'll refer to my cousin as R from now on. Unfortunately, shortly before my 4th birthday, R went missing. I prefer not to disclose many details about the case, but it became a significant story in the UK at the time, capturing the nation's attention as they searched for the missing 7-year-old boy. A few weeks later, shortly after my 4th birthday, they discovered R's lifeless body. At the tender age of 4, I struggled to comprehend the concept of death. So, when my mother had to break the news that he wouldn't return, my tears flowed uncontrollably. It's essential to mention that my mother was expecting my little brother during that difficult time. To accommodate the new arrival, my parents moved me into a room with my 2 younger sisters, and my brother was born 3 months after R's tragic discovery. It was after this room change that the unusual visits began. R would visit me every night, sitting at the end of my bed, conversing with me. He appeared pale and silvery, resembling the ghosts in Harry Potter, though I hadn't yet been exposed to the series. This happened years before the first film even came out, making it impossible for me to have fabricated such an idea in my 4-year-old imagination. I vividly recall one night when I sensed my mother approaching the stairs. She attempted to be quiet, but I could sense her presence. To avoid getting into trouble for staying up late, I pretended to be asleep as she opened the door a crack. "Emma," she whispered. I squeezed my eyes shut, but she saw through my ruse. "Emma, who are you talking to?" she inquired. I opened my eyes and replied, I was talking to R. He's here right now, but I can't see him properly because you've opened the door and the hallway light is shining on him." My mother, trying to make sense of the situation, responded, "Oh, I see. We need to stop talking now and get some sleep. Okay? Good night." My mom left the room, but the next day, she inquired about it again, thinking I might have been half asleep and dreaming. I reiterated my account of the nightly visits, and my mother believed me. These visits continued for years. Then, around the age of 6, my aunt somehow learned about these visits, though I'm uncertain how. Her reaction was anger. She called me a liar and informed my mom that if I were to visit anyone, he would choose to visit his mother, as she was his closest relative. That night, R came to see me as usual, but he seemed melancholic. He confessed that he never intended to upset his mom by visiting me, so the visits would have to be less frequent. After that, he only visited me on birthdays and Christmas. The last time I saw him was when I was around 9 years old. I had a dream, and I can still recall every detail vividly, even 15 years later. In the dream, I found myself in a graveyard, running in fear as skeletons and zombies emerged from their graves, pursuing me relentlessly. The gates were my sanctuary, and I kept thinking, I must reach those gates, they can't follow me beyond. But no matter how hard I ran, the gates remained tantalizingly out of reach. Overwhelmed with fear, I contemplated surrendering to my pursuers. Suddenly, my cousin appeared, and I was transported to safety on the other side of the gate, beyond the reach of the skeletons. R looked at me and said, "I'll always be there to protect you. Never forget." Then I awoke with a start. That was the last time I saw him, and remembering that dream brings me a sense of closure, as if it was his final farewell. A few months after that dream, my mom and some friends visited a psychic for amusement, not taking it seriously. The psychic informed my mom that one of her children possessed a special gift but couldn't discern which one. Given my experiences with R, my mom believed it might be me, especially since I frequently experienced déjà vu and occasionally predicted future events based on dreams. The psychic also revealed highly personal information and declared R to be my guardian angel, which brought my mom some comfort. While I've considered exploring and refining any potential gift, I'm not sure where to begin. As I mentioned, I have a strong belief in science, though I have experimented with tarot cards, healing crystals, and dowsers in the past. I'm open to suggestions on how to further explore this. Now, onto my next story, which unfolds when I was about 6 years old and had invisible friends. To everyone else, they were imperceptible, but not to me. Their names were Sophie, Hannah, Jessica, Megan, and either Amelia or Amanda. I sometimes forget. I distinctly recall playing games like Ring Around the Rosie with them in the backyard, holding hands and skipping in a circle. Interestingly, my mom has no recollection of my invisible friends, despite my regular conversations about them and her watching me through the window as we played Ring Around the Rosie. They only stuck around for a few months or perhaps a year before vanishing. Fast forward to my high school years, where I made new friends who remained close through school and into college. I still maintain contact with some of these friends today, including Sophie, Hannah, Jessica, Megan, and both an Amanda and an Amelia. It could be a mere coincidence that their names matched those of my childhood invisible friends, but it's worth noting that some of the names were not common, and I had negative experiences with a few of them during my primary school years. Therefore, I wouldn't have chosen those names deliberately. Moreover, I had never met a Jessica before, and I had never even heard the names Amelia or Amanda, so there's no way I could have predicted my future friends' names. The uncanny connection still sends a shiver down my spine. Finally, the third and most recent story isn't about me but about my mother, and it unfolded less than a year ago. My mother works as a caregiver for the elderly, and they were hosting a garden party at her workplace to celebrate a royal wedding. Everyone was outdoors, and one of my mom's colleagues decided to take a photo to capture the festive moment. However, after snapping the picture, they noticed a figure in the window that undeniably resembled someone waving at the camera. What makes this even stranger is that there was no one inside the building at the time. Everyone was outside. The window was open, ruling out any reflections in the glass. Most eerily of all, my mother insists that the face in the photo bore an uncanny resemblance to an elderly man she had been caring for, who had passed away in that very building just a week prior to the photograph. This month marks the 1-year anniversary of a memorable road trip I took with my brother. The particular incident I'm about to recount has consistently brought tears to my eyes whenever I've reflected upon it. Attempting to share this story with anyone results in me breaking into uncontrollable sobs. I'm not usually prone to crying, but the fear I experienced during that journey still feels incredibly raw. My brother and I embarked on a road trip from Ohio to visit our friends in Portland, Oregon. The initial part of the journey was relatively uneventful. We drove continuously, covering the distance in just over 2 days. The only peculiar thing we both noticed was that, on long stretches of country roads with no intersections or connecting routes, a car would suddenly appear behind us. We initially dismissed this as fatigue-induced oversight, but within 5 minutes, the car would vanish, leaving us perplexed. We both shouted in unison the first time it happened, and my brother, usually the voice of reason, was just as perturbed as I was. This unsettling pattern repeated a few more times, but eventually, we started to make light of it, as there was little else we could do. The truly disturbing part occurred on our return trip when we decided to drive through California and explore the southern states, including renowned landmarks like the Redwoods and the Grand Canyon. We journeyed along the coastal highway, visited the Redwoods, and continued on to San Francisco. On the first day and well into the night, I was driving while my brother took a short nap. At this point, my GPS began relentlessly attempting to reroute our path. I'd select the coastal highway route, drive for about 10 minutes, and it would inexplicably redirect. I'd often realize this after an hour of getting lost in the middle of nowhere. This kept happening, and, in frustration, I followed the GPS to reach Los Angeles. After about 10 minutes on this new route, I arrived at a highway, and this is when the tears began. I'm actually tearing up as I write this, thinking about it. My GPS instructed me to turn left, but there was a median with a clear no left turn sign. A sign further ahead indicated Route 1 South with a right pointing arrow. Since my original plan was to take Route 1 south, I turned right. I want to stress this point. I drove for about 2 to 4 miles, maybe more. I'm not sure if exits were spaced every mile or 2 miles. But it only took 5 minutes. I'm certain of this because I kept checking the time obsessively since the moment I turned right. Then something inexplicable occurred. My GPS started spinning its map and ceased all functionality. It didn't reroute or provide any suggestions. It simply stopped working. Feeling stressed and unable to recognize any names on the road signs, I decided to exit the highway. I passed just one exit and got off at the second exit, which was a mere 5 minutes from where I initially turned onto the highway. The moment I took the exit, my GPS instantly resumed working and suggested a new route. A car behind me also took the exit and mirrored my turns. The GPS guided me through pitch-black country roads, and all the while, the car's headlights pierced my rearview mirror. After about 15 minutes, tears began rolling down my cheeks. I felt a deep sense of dread at each stop sign, fearing for our safety, irrational, perhaps, but that's what I was thinking. I was genuinely scared. This unnerving pursuit continued for 45 minutes. I tried to remain calm and rational, letting my brother sleep. I even considered the possibility that this was a well-known route through California. After 45 minutes, I finally spotted a streetlight at an upcoming stop sign and hoped there would be a gas station or any populated place. But you won't believe what awaited me at that intersection. It was the same turn onto the highway with the median and the no left turn sign. The exact same spot where I had been nearly an hour ago. Again, I emphasized that I was on the highway for just 5 minutes before exiting. I followed my GPS instructions from the moment I left the highway, and 45 minutes later, I found myself back at that same point. I came to a stop, and when I looked in my rearview mirror, the car that had been tailing us was nowhere to be seen. I burst into terrified tears and took the left turn over the median. My brother woke up and started talking, but we both find it challenging to be emotionally open with each other, so I have no idea if he noticed my tears. I recall thinking that if I shared what happened, I'd be too frightened to continue our road trip, so I made a concerted effort to push it out of my mind. From that point until we safely reached home that night, the GPS worked flawlessly, and there were no disappearing cars or any other unusual incidents. As I mentioned at the beginning of this account, it's been a year, and I may have forgotten some of the finer details that made this experience so traumatic. However, the memories I've shared in this post still evoke tears and make me jump at every noise in my house. Every aspect of this event sends shivers down my spine. I'm eager to hear your theories, as I'm open to any ideas. I've never felt the need to theorize or make sense of it because, in the end, the actual explanation doesn't matter. What remains is the haunting memory, and I'll likely never be at ease in the same place again. My spouse and I have been actively searching for a new home for several months now. As a part of our regular weekend routine, we meet up with our real estate agent to explore various houses on the market. This past Saturday, we came across a property in a nice neighborhood at a reasonable price, prompting us to schedule a visit the following day. We arrived at the property around 10 a.m. on Sunday, accompanied by our realtor. As we embarked on our walkthrough, it immediately became apparent that the previous occupants of the house were elderly. Outdated wallpaper, unconventional color choices, and a stair chair, a power chair on a track leading to the basement were among the telltale signs. We inspected the kitchen and bedrooms, and everything seemed quite decent. However, when we reached a room that appeared to have served as an old craft room with built-in shelving and a desk, a peculiar vibe was noticeable. Keep in mind, this becomes relevant later. After exploring the entire first floor, we decided to check out the basement. It's worth noting that the basement's lights were not functioning, possibly due to some trip breakers, as other room lights weren't working either. The basement layout presented two options upon descending the stairs. One could go left into an older, finished section of the basement, or right into an unfinished utility area. Initially, our realtor, my spouse, and I all chose to go right. I examined the water softener system and storage while my wife decided to explore the finished section. After a moment, I overheard her expressing discomfort and an inability to enter a particular room. I chuckled, assuming it was a playful reaction to the dark, eerie atmosphere. Our realtor decided to investigate but promptly retreated with a similar comment. I thought they were merely playing around, so I ventured into the room with my phone's flashlight set to its maximum brightness. I strode in confidently, but only took a few steps before an overwhelming sense of paralyzing anxiety overcame me. I was gripped by an intense chill, physically tensing up and recoiling from the sensations. Prior to entering, I had felt no apprehension about this room. While my wife and realtor had felt uneasy about going in, I had no reservations. I simply wanted to explore the space. Yet, in an instant, I knew that I was unwelcome in that room, as if it was occupied by something or someone else that did not want me there. Gazing into the darkness that my phone's light couldn't seem to penetrate, except for a small window at the far end gently glowing from the overcast day outside, I began to feel unwell and decided to exit quickly. I retreated to the base of the stairs, suggesting that we all leave the basement. As we stepped outside into the backyard, we felt compelled to discuss our unsettling experience. My wife disclosed that she had felt a physical force pushing on her shoulders as she attempted to enter the room, explaining her earlier comment. The realtor seemed to have had a similar experience to mine, struggling with extreme anxiety and feeling unwelcome. After surveying the property and returning to the house to close the shades and turn off the lights, our realtor noticed a piece of yellow lace hanging from my wife's sweater as she ascended the stairs. Under normal circumstances, this wouldn't be alarming, likely a result of static cling. However, given the eerie experience we had just encountered, it took on a more sinister connotation. Upon returning to the house, our realtor collected the piece of lace and left it in the old craft room, as we preferred not to bring anything from that house with us. We secured the property and discussed our experience further in the driveway. Later that night, as I lay down to sleep, I found myself in that hazy state between slumber and wakefulness, experiencing a brief dream. I was back in the house, standing at the top of the basement stairs and watching as the electric stair chair began descending on its own, as if baiting me to return to the basement. I woke up quickly and thankfully did not have another dream about it. While I generally approach the paranormal with skepticism, I'm open to the possibility. I believe most occurrences have rational explanations, and this one may as well. However, after reflecting on it for a couple of days, I'm willing to set aside my rationality and describe what I felt. I believe there were two entities in that house, an elderly man and an elderly woman, presumably the former residents. The upper floor seemed to be her domain, creating a welcoming and bright atmosphere. I suspect she was responsible for the yellow lace on my wife's sweater. In contrast, the basement room appeared to be his territory, and he did not appreciate uninvited guests. It wasn't necessarily a malicious intent, but more of a get-out-of-my-house reaction. Regardless of the actual events and the intentions of any entities present, we are unlikely to make an offer on that property. I was 16 at the time it occurred. I lived with my single parents who worked abroad, granting me the house to myself at night and occasional daytime help. High school had become more challenging after enduring a devastating heartbreak. The start of the third quarter brought a gloomy routine. Every day, I returned home from school to an empty, 5-bedroom house, overwhelmed by depression. Some nights, I would cry myself to sleep. Time passed, and a week or two before finals, I was deeply engrossed in my studies. However, time did little to ease the pain, as the source of my heartache was in the same classes as me. Yes, I know, but I was young. I fell asleep once more with tears. I woke up later that night and went straight to the bathroom. My room featured a large glass window, around 2 by 3 meters, perpendicular to my study table against the wall. I walked past my study table to reach the bathroom. While I was using the bathroom, I heard a loud explosion emanate from my room. It sounded like a local firework, similar to a large triangle. I quickly finished and rushed back to inspect what had happened. Everything appeared fine, and I even checked outside to see if the sound had come from there, but the window was closed. Had an external firework gone off? It should have been muffled, but it wasn't. The sound was crisp and incredibly loud. My computer was unplugged, and there was no smell of smoke, so my power supply unit or automatic voltage regulator exploding was ruled out. I shook my head and dismissed it as nothing. Returning to my bed, as soon as my back touched the comforter, I felt multiple stabbing sensations in my back. In panic, I jumped up, pulling my comforter aside, only to find numerous ballpoint pens on my bed, forming a small mound. I was utterly bewildered. How could ballpoint pens be there? No one could have placed them there while I was in the bathroom. My house and yard were locked and surrounded by 4-meter walls with spikes. With hesitation, I gathered the pens and placed them on my table, which was adjacent to my bed. After arranging the pens, I still felt a sense of unease. It took me a moment to realize that the air had grown much colder while I was lost in thought. Deciding it was due to the emotional strain, I attempted to go back to sleep. This time, I lay on my right side, facing away from the window and table. Suddenly, I heard the familiar tune of the Windows XP startup sound coming from my speakers, even though my computer was unplugged. The room brightened as my monitor turned on, and I noticed the distinct blue light of the Windows login screen. Not only that, but my feet felt an intense cold spot, unlike the room's usual coldness. I tried to turn my head slightly, and from my peripheral vision, I saw a tall, faint, white figure. I couldn't see it clearly, but I knew it was staring at me, even though I couldn't discern its face. In a state of panic, I bolted out of my room and ran to my parents' room on the other end of the house. I felt safe there, surrounded by rosaries and an image of Jesus. Suddenly, I heard faint and slow knocks on the wall, the kind that sturdy wooden walls produce, one after the other. The knocking grew louder and louder until it abruptly stopped, and the door swung open. I couldn't see anything or anyone, but I felt a presence watching me. I turned on all the lights, the TV, and sat at the back of the bed. Nothing happened, and I stayed up until morning. At 6 a.m., I returned to my room, and my computer was off and unplugged. However, my speakers were on, and there was a collection of pens on my table. I knew something unusual had happened the previous night, but I had to prepare for school. As I entered the bathroom, I found my toothbrush placed in the middle of the floor, which unnerved me. I decided to use my parents' shower instead, grabbing my clothes and heading to school. When I told my friends, they laughed and accused me of making things up, claiming I had been up late playing Counter-Strike 1.7. I got home at the usual time of 5 p.m. and tried to carry on with my day, convinced that I might be losing my mind. However, as I fell asleep, I woke up to the same chilling sensation, knowing that someone was watching me. The worst part was when I glanced at the clock and saw that it was 3 a.m. This pattern repeated every night, but I realized that I only woke up at 3 a.m. when I slept in my room. When I slept in my parents' room, I was fine, waking up at the usual 5:30 a.m. with no cold or fearful sensations. I decided to avoid sleeping in my room for the remainder of the school year. When summer arrived, I traveled to my sister's house, which was 2 cities away, in an attempt to forget my heartache and the haunting experiences. However, upon my return, I attempted to sleep in my room on the first night, but to no avail. I still woke up at 3 a.m., this time struggling to breathe. Desperate for answers, I started exploring the neighborhood. One day, I encountered one of my mom's friends and other acquaintances gathered on a porch. I recounted my experiences, leaving most of them speechless. However, 2 of them offered an explanation, translated to English. "My child, were you incredibly angry, bothered, or sad these past months?" I confirmed this and mentioned my ongoing heartache. One of them nodded and continued, explaining that something had followed me home, attracted to my negative energy like a cloud. It had found a lair in my room, which was drenched in sadness. This revelation terrified me, even though I had not been one to believe in folklore. The experiences I had couldn't be denied. In response, I returned home and began planning a solution. I visited a nearby computer cafe to research cleansing methods and decided to use holy water and prayers. On a Saturday, I went to the local parish with a bottle, attempting to collect holy water from one of the stone basins. However, a priest stopped me and found it amusing that a non-regular attendee like me was seeking holy water. I shared my experiences, and his expression turned somber. He tried to dissuade me from my plan, but I was determined to proceed. He left me with a warning: "You must be very careful with that. You do not know who, or worse, what you are dealing with." Despite the priest's warning, I continued with my plan. Returning home, I entered my room and began splashing holy water around, beginning with the window. It felt like a surreal dream or nightmare, but as soon as the holy water touched the room, I felt an intense cold, unlike anything I had experienced before. It was as if I had been frozen. I sensed a presence standing behind me and heard an eerie, gurgling scream that was both high-pitched and low in unison. Then, it felt like every hair on my body had become frozen guitar strings, and someone was plucking them all at once with excruciating force. The pain was unbearable, and I felt as if my skin was being torn apart. As I ran out of the room, the door slammed shut on its own. I rushed to my parents' room, grabbed the keys and some money, and took 2 buses to my sister's place. I arrived there in distress and with a rash-like redness all over my skin. People assumed I had lost my mind, while my sister worried that I was on drugs. She called my mom, and they agreed to let me stay with my sister until a week before the end of summer. During this time, I attempted to regain my composure, but for the first few days, I couldn't sleep properly. Eventually, I returned home and, accompanied by our house help, we unlocked my room. When we finally managed to open the door, we found it in disarray. Lichen covered everything, mushrooms had grown on my bed, chair, and wardrobe, and the bed sheets appeared damp. As I stepped inside, an extreme coldness enveloped me, and the house help also felt a strange presence watching us. We quickly backed out, locked the room, and informed my parents over the phone. My mom decided to have the room renovated immediately, and I was allowed to use my parents' room from that point on. Over time, the room began to undergo renovations, but the construction workers reported strange sensations and intense cold while working there. 2 of them even had an accident when installing the new floor. Some claimed to have seen a figure standing in the room at night. I never slept in that room again, and it remained locked. Years later, I left for college, and on a visit back home, I unlocked the room after it had remained locked for 10 years. To my relief, I found nothing unusual, but I still remember the chilling experiences vividly. My room had changed significantly, with a large painting of Jesus in front of the door and some rosaries. Apart from these additions, the room was empty. I locked it again and never dared to sleep there. My parents made it a rule that no one, not even the house help, was allowed to enter the room, and it would remain locked forever. Please like, share, and subscribe if you enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching.